final book that I want to talk about in this session about archaeology is a book of local archaeology. We have many books in the collection that look at local archaeological sites and finds and the history of the local area, right the way back to the earliest human habitation here. So I wanted to get out one example of that. The example that I've chosen is one that I've chosen it basically because the author of this particular work is someone who I have researched in the past and have certain links with and an affection for. So this book is, well, I say this book, this is a reprint of a short journal article entitled "The Recent Excavations on the Site of the Roman Camp of Margidunum," and it's by Dr. Felix Oswald. So, Margidunum is a Roman settlement on the Fossway near what is now Bingham, so near modern Bingham. And in fact, if you're driving up towards Bingham, there is a roundabout that's been called the Margidunum roundabout, and the majority of the settlement is actually underneath that roundabout. So Margidunum, it was a Roman settlement. It was initially established as a military post in the 1st century AD, and then a civilian settlement grew up around it. And by the end of the 1st century into the 2nd century, it became quite a substantial settlement. It was defended in the 2nd century with an earthwork and then later with a stone wall, and it wasn't abandoned as a settlement until the 5th century. So this is a place that included effectively the whole period of Roman Britain. So, and the excavations there were mostly led by Felix Oswald. So Felix Oswald was born in 1866. He lived until 1958. He was a really interesting chap, actually. He studied botany, zoology and geology, and then went on to undertake mapping expeditions in Armenia and in Africa, and he earned also a reputation as a very accurate cartographer from these expeditions. And during the course of this period, he developed an amateur interest in archaeology, which over the later part of his career developed into an academic expertise. So in 1910, he began excavating at Margidunum. He worked with the local physician, Thomas Davis Bryce, and the funding for the excavation came from a gentleman named Fred W. Dobson. And Fred Dobson was sufficiently moneyed that when they came across problems of landowners not wanting to allow them to excavate on their land, Dobson just bought the field from the landowners in order that the excavation could continue. So this harks back to what I was saying in the very first part of this session about archaeology and antiquarianism as an appropriate interest for those of the moneyed society. So the excavations at Margidunum started 1910. Felix Oswald continued to excavate there over the course of the next 30 years and revealed the huge importance of the site and particularly the finds that were coming from the site. And there were a lot of interesting finds which are detailed in this report. So we've got a little map at the beginning of the report, a sketch plan by Felix Oswald, who, as we know, was a particularly accurate cartographer. He talks about what he's discovered, and then throughout the book we've got some photographs and illustrations of some of the finds. Mostly the pottery, and that was part of his particular interest. So his interest, at this point he was interested in the entirety of the excavation, but he had a particular interest in the terra sigillata, which is a particular type of pottery, also known as Samian ware, and it's a bright terracotta red colour, often highly decorated, and it would have been a very expensive product. This was imported from Gaul and northern Italy, and it would have been your showy tablewares. It's the sort of things that you would bring out to show people how rich you were, how cultured you were. The terra sigillata, the Samian ware, was the kind of high end of pottery in Roman Britain. And a lot of shards of this were found at Margidunum, which indicated the high status of the site as much as anything. And Felix Oswald became especially interested in this. Part of it is because it has interesting moulded decoration with different symbols and things which can be looked at and traced and classified. Also, a lot of Samian ware has potter's marks, has the stamps with the names of the potters on, which obviously is an extra level of interest, knowing and being able to link items to specific manufacturers. So Felix Oswald started to investigate this. He started to acquire his own collection of Samian ware, including buying collections from other collectors. He acquired a lot of material from Lisieux in France, which was one of the production sites for the Samian ware. And so he got, from this acquisition, he got not just the finished pots, he also got the wasters, the ones that had gone wrong in the kiln, bits of the kiln furniture. Absolutely amazing collection. And he researched it very, very deeply and very thoroughly, to the point where he became the leading authority on Samian ware in the world, and still has that reputation to a certain extent today. So even within this book, which is the report of the very earliest excavations at Margidunum. This report was written in 1913, so just 3 years after the very first excavations. He is recording in detail these Samian ware vessels that he's found at the site, and his illustrations are, and we've got to the point now where this is exactly like a modern archaeological illustration, other than not having the scale on to show you exactly how large they are. So this is proper kind of scientific classification of archaeological finds, together with photographs of some of the pottery. So these are shards of Samian ware with the moulded decoration of little people and various decorative patterns and schemes by which Felix Oswald went on to classify the Samian ware. So this work on the Samian ware gave him a very growing reputation. In 1929, he was appointed the honorary reader in in the history of Roman Britain at the University of Nottingham. This was a new post that they created, and they appointed him to that. In the early 1930s, Dobson, who had funded the Margidunum dig, donated all of the finds to the University of Nottingham, with the condition that they would be displayed in an appropriate fashion. And that was the very first donation which created the University of Nottingham Museum, which is still there now. So the museum was created with the Margidunum finds, and Felix Oswald was appointed as the first curator of the museum. The museum then went through various iterations and acquired a lot more acquisitions of finds and so on, and is still there today and very much worth a visit. But Felix Oswald and his finds at Margidunum were instrumental in the beginning of that. So this book, this publication, as I say, it's from very early in the excavation of Margidunum, 1913, and it's come into the library because it's part of the James Ward collection. So people who've seen some of my previous Spotlight sessions will know that the James Ward collection is a large collection of local history books that were acquired by James Ward and donated to the library in 1924. So this is one of the examples that shows off James Ward's particular interest in very local history and archaeology. There are many other books in the James Ward collection that are related to the archaeology of the local area and to the archaeological community in the local area. So information about archaeological congresses that were held in Nottingham, and all sorts of interesting correspondence and so on. But just for this session, I thought I'll get out just one of these books. And this, interestingly, of course, because it's part of the James Ward collection, means that the classification of this book is also not CC for antiquities. It's a JWC because it's part of the James Ward collection. So that means that all of the books that I've brought out to show you for this spotlight on archaeology are from different parts of the collection to the one where one might expect our archaeological books to be. So archaeology clearly is has been, over the course of the last 200 years, such a varied and wide-ranging subject that within our collection the books are classified in all sorts of different areas, so art, travel, science and local history. And we have books which show the whole development of the way that archaeology became a scientific discipline with specific rules and processes, and became the profession that it is today.